The rain hadn't stopped since morning. It streaked down the windows of the attorney's office in thin gray lines, and I watched it instead of watching my family. That was easier. That had always been easier. I arrived in civilian clothes. A simple navy blouse, dark slacks, no jewelry except for my watch. No insignia, no ribbons, nothing that would announce what I'd become in the 16 years since I'd left this town behind. I took a seat in the back row of leather chairs, near the door, where I could observe without being observed. Old habits from the bridge of a destroyer. You see everything better from a position people forget to check. Derek noticed me immediately. Well, nice of you to show up for something, Elise. His voice carried across the room with practiced condescension. At 41, my eldest cousin had perfected the art of making every word sound like a judgment. He sat in the front row, legs spread wide, arm draped over the empty chair beside him as if he owned the room, as if he owned everything. Missed the funeral reception too, or did you just get lost on the way? I didn't answer. I'd learned a long time ago that silence was the only language Derek couldn't manipulate. Meredith leaned toward Brandon, not bothering to lower her voice. She's always like this. Disappears for months, years even, then shows up when there's something to gain. She adjusted her designer scarf with manicured fingers. Grandpa would be disappointed. Again. The sting of that word. Again. As if my absences had been choices. As if deployment orders were suggestions I could decline. As if the night I spent in the South China Sea pulling survivors from burning water had been a vacation I'd selfishly chosen over Christmas dinner. I folded my hands in my lap and kept my eyes on the attorney as he arranged papers on his desk. The room was exactly what you'd expect from an old money law firm. Dark wood paneling that absorbed the gray light. Brass lamps with green shades. The smell of old leather and older money. My grandfather had trusted these people for 40 years, and now they would execute his final wishes while his grandchildren circled like sharks. Before we begin, the attorney said, clearing his throat, I want to express my condolences to the Harmon family. Admiral Harmon was a decorated hero and a man of exceptional character. Uncle Victor nodded solemnly, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. Thank you. My father lived with honor. We only hope to carry on his legacy. I watched him pat Derek's shoulder as he said it. The gesture was small, but I understood its meaning perfectly. Dad always knew you'd carry the legacy. The unspoken message that had followed me my entire life. Not you, Elise, never you. The attorney began reading. The house went to Uncle Victor. The investments were divided among the grandchildren. Then came the medals, and the room seemed to lean forward as one. To my grandson, Derek, I leave my Bronze Star medals from the Korean conflict. Derek's chest swelled. He was already calculating which wall in his study would showcase them best. To my grandson, Brandon, the Purple Heart I received at Incheon. Brandon grinned, nudging his sister. That's going right above my desk. Clients are going to love it. To my granddaughter, Meredith, the ceremonial swords presented to me upon my retirement from the Pacific Fleet. Meredith actually clapped her hands. Oh, those will look perfect in the foyer. Finally, something with real history. I noticed none of them mentioned what the medals meant, what the Purple Heart had cost. The shrapnel still lodged in Grandpa's hip. The men who died beside him while he survived. They saw display cases and conversation pieces. They saw metal and ribbon and reflected glory. Brandon glanced back at me and smirked. Don't worry, Elise. I'm sure Grandpa left you something. Maybe his old Navy cap. You could hang it on your boat. He laughed at his own joke. She probably doesn't even know what a Medal of Honor looks like. The attorney paused. He looked up from his papers and something in his expression shifted. A subtle change that my cousins, drunk on their inheritance, failed to notice. But I noticed. I was trained to notice. There is one final bequest, he said slowly. Separate from the others. Derek sat up straighter. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the Medal of Honor, the crown jewel. He'd already told anyone who would listen that Grandpa had promised it to him, the eldest grandson, the one who would honor the family name. Regarding the Medal of Honor, the attorney continued, Admiral Harmon included a specific instruction. The room held its breath. He wrote, "Medals aren't inherited, they're earned through sacrifice." Confusion rippled through my family. Derek's smile faltered. Meredith exchanged a glance with Brandon. Uncle Victor leaned forward, frowning. "The Medal of Honor," the attorney said, "is not included in the general distribution of military memorabilia." Derek stood up. "What does that mean? There must be some mistake." The attorney looked at him calmly. "There is no mistake, Mr. Harmon." He turned a page in his folder. "There is more to read." And for the first time that afternoon, my family turned to look at me. Their eyes on me felt like a physical weight. I had felt the pressure of 1,000 fathoms of water above my head, had felt the vibration of enemy rounds striking the hull of my ship, and still their gaze unsettled me in ways combat never had. This was different. This was personal. But before the attorney could continue, before whatever came next could unfold, my mind drifted backward. It always did when I was surrounded by family. The present became unbearable, so I retreated to the past, searching for the moments that had shaped me into someone they no longer recognized. I was 8 years old the first time I understood that my grandfather and I shared something the others couldn't touch. It was a Sunday afternoon, the house full of relatives arguing about football and politics, and I had slipped away to find quiet. Grandpa's study was at the end of a long hallway, and the door was always closed. But that day, it was open just a crack, and I pushed through without knocking. He sat at his desk, a soft cloth in his hands, polishing a medal I didn't yet know the name of. The Bronze Star I would later learn. One of 3 he'd earned in Korea. He looked up when I entered, but he didn't tell me to leave. He just nodded toward the chair beside him. I climbed up and watched in silence as his weathered hands moved over the medal. The ribbon was faded, the star itself scratched and dull in places. It didn't look like treasure. It looked tired, old, heavy with something I couldn't name. "Grandpa," I finally whispered, "what does it mean?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept polishing, his eyes far away, seeing something I couldn't see. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "It means I remember the men who didn't come home." I didn't understand then. I was just a child. But the words lodged somewhere deep inside me, and they stayed there, waiting for the day I would understand them completely. Waiting for the night when I would hold my own medal in shaking hands and weep for the faces I couldn't save. The family never noticed our bond. They were too busy performing for him, competing for his approval in ways that grew louder and more desperate every year. Derek paraded his business achievements. Meredith bragged about her children's private schools. Brandon bought military memorabilia at auctions and displayed it prominently whenever Grandpa visited, as if ownership of history could substitute for living it. But Grandpa saw through all of it. I know he did. Because when he looked at me, he didn't ask about promotions or possessions. He asked if I was sleeping enough, if the sea still called to me the way it had called to him, if I remembered why we served. I was 16 when Derek first mocked my dream of joining the Navy. It was a family barbecue, the summer before my junior year of high school. I had just told my mother that I wanted to apply to the Naval Academy, and somehow the news had spread through the family like wildfire. Derek cornered me by the picnic table, a beer in his hand and a smirk on his face. "The Navy? Seriously, Elise?" He laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know there are real colleges, right? Places where you can actually get a career instead of playing soldier on a boat." I remember the heat rising to my cheeks. The way my mother looked away, embarrassed by my ambition rather than proud of it. The way Uncle Victor chuckled and shook his head, as if my dreams were a phase I would outgrow. But across the yard, standing by the grill with tongs in his hand, Grandpa caught my eye. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once slowly. And that nod carried more weight than every word of discouragement the family had ever spoken. 4 years later, I graduated from Annapolis. The ceremony was on a perfect May morning, the kind of day that felt like a promise. I stood in my dress whites among hundreds of other newly commissioned ensigns, and I scanned the crowd for my family. My mother had sent her regrets. A work conflict, she claimed. Derek and Meredith hadn't even bothered with an excuse. Uncle Victor said he was proud of me in a text message, but he didn't make the trip. Only Grandpa came. He was 81 years old, walking with a cane because the shrapnel in his hip had never stopped hurting. He had driven 6 hours alone to be there. And when the ceremony ended and I found him in the crowd, he didn't hug me. He didn't shake my hand. He saluted. A crisp, perfect salute, the kind that had been drilled into him 60 years earlier and never left his bones. His eyes were bright with tears he refused to shed. "Now you understand," he whispered. "Now you know what the medals remember." I returned his salute, my throat too tight to speak. And in that moment, the absence of my family didn't matter anymore. The only approval I had ever truly needed was standing right in front of me. The years that followed carved a distance between me and the Harmons that geography alone couldn't explain. I rose through the ranks faster than anyone expected, from ensign to lieutenant commander to commander. I served on destroyers and cruisers, sailed through typhoons in the Pacific, and stood watch in waters where the wrong move could start a war. I missed holidays. I missed birthdays. I missed my grandmother's funeral because I was deployed in the South China Sea and there was no way to get back in time. The family never forgave me for that. They didn't understand that I had wept for her alone in my quarters, surrounded by nothing but steel and salt water, grieving in a way they would never witness. They thought my absence was a choice. They thought I was avoiding them. But every time I missed a family gathering, it was because I was somewhere else entirely, doing work I could never explain to people who measured success in stock portfolios and square footage. The mission that changed, everything happened 2 years ago. I was commanding a destroyer escort in the Western Pacific when we received a distress signal. An Allied vessel, a supply ship carrying 47 crew members, had struck a mine in contested waters. They were taking on water fast, and they weren't alone. Enemy patrol boats had been spotted in the area, drawn by the explosion like sharks to blood. My orders were to maintain position and await reinforcement. But reinforcement was hours away, and the supply ship had minutes. I made the call. I ordered my ship into hostile waters. The details are classified even now, but what I can tell you is this. We reached the supply ship as she was listing hard to port, her lower decks already flooded. We launched rescue boats under enemy fire. I commanded from the bridge for 9 hours, coordinating the evacuation while rounds struck the water around us and shrapnel tore through the air. I took a piece of that shrapnel in my left shoulder. The corpsmen wanted to evacuate me, but I refused. There were still people in the water. There were still lives to save. By the time it was over, 47 souls had been pulled from the sea. 47 families would not receive the call that every military family dreads. We lost 2 of my own crew in the effort, and their faces visit me still in the quiet hours before dawn. 6 months later, I stood in a private ceremony at the Pentagon and received the Navy Cross from the Secretary of the Navy, second only to the Medal of Honor for Valor in Combat. The citation spoke of extraordinary heroism, decisive leadership, courage under fire. I listened to the words, and all I could think about were the 2 sailors who hadn't come home. I told no one in my family, not because I was humble, though perhaps I was, but because I knew they wouldn't understand. They would see the medal as a trophy, something to brag about at dinner parties. They wouldn't see the weight of it, the cost, the 47 lives that made it mean something, and the 2 lives that made it unbearable. Grandpa found out anyway. He had contacts in the Navy, old friends from his own service who kept him informed. He never told me he knew. He never asked me to explain. He just sent me a letter, 3 sentences long. I heard what you did. I am proud. The ones who matter will know. I kept that letter in my wallet, folded so many times the creases had worn thin. I kept it because it was the only acknowledgement I needed, the only legacy that mattered. And now Grandpa was gone, and his legacy was being divided like spoils of war, and my cousins were looking at me as if I had stolen something that belonged to them. But they had never understood. None of them had ever understood. Medals aren't inherited. They're earned through sacrifice. The memory faded as Derek's voice shattered the silence of the attorney's office. This is absurd. He was on his feet now, his face flushed with the particular shade of red that came from wounded entitlement. There has to be a mistake. The Medal of Honor was supposed to come to me. Dad promised me. He looked at Uncle Victor for support. Tell them what Grandpa said. Uncle Victor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Derek, let's just hear what the attorney has to say. I'm sure there's an explanation. An explanation? Derek's voice rose higher. The explanation is obvious. Someone got to him. Someone manipulated a dying old man into changing his will. His gaze swung toward me like a searchlight. You did this. You show up out of nowhere after being gone for years, and suddenly the Medal of Honor doesn't go where it was supposed to go. I said nothing. I had learned long ago that silence was a weapon more powerful than words. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. Every accusation they hurled was a confession of who they really were. Brandon stood up beside his brother, emboldened by Derek's outrage. She's never even here. She misses every family event, every holiday, every funeral. And now she swoops in to take what doesn't belong to her. He laughed bitterly. She probably doesn't even know what the Medal of Honor represents. She just knows it's valuable. The irony of that statement would have been funny if it hadn't been so painful. Brandon, who had never worn a uniform, who collected military memorabilia like baseball cards, who saw medals as decorations rather than testaments of blood and sacrifice, was accusing me of not understanding their meaning. Meredith leaned forward, her perfectly painted lips curled into a sneer. Let's be honest about what's happening here. Elise has always been the ghost of this family. Never present, never participating, never contributing. And now, at the last moment, she manipulates Grandpa's final wishes for her own benefit. She shook her head with exaggerated disappointment. It's pathetic, really. Pathetic and sad. I felt my hands tighten in my lap, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of command had taught me to control every muscle in my face, to reveal nothing to subordinates or superiors who might be watching for weakness. This was no different. This was just another hostile environment, another situation requiring tactical patience. Uncle Victor finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of paternal authority he believed he possessed. I think we need to consider the possibility that my father wasn't in his right mind at the end. The dementia, the confusion, the medications. He may not have understood what he was signing. He looked at the attorney with something approaching challenge. Is that something we can contest? A competency evaluation. The attorney's expression didn't change. Admiral Harmon underwent a cognitive assessment before executing this version of his will. He was determined to be of sound mind. The document is legally binding. Then someone influenced him. Derek's voice had dropped to something low and dangerous. Someone took advantage of a sick old man, and we all know who that someone is. He turned to face me fully, and I saw in his eyes the same contempt that had followed me since childhood. The same dismissal. The same certainty that I was less than, would always be less than, could never be worthy of the attention he believed belonged to him alone. You've always been jealous of this family, Elise. Jealous that you weren't the favorite. Jealous that you didn't have what we have. So you ran off to play sailor, and now you come back to steal what you couldn't earn. Play sailor. The words hung in the air, and something inside me went very still. I thought about the nights I had spent on the bridge of my ship, watching the horizon for threats that could end lives in an instant. I thought about the weight of command, the responsibility for hundreds of souls whose families trusted me to bring them home. I thought about the shrapnel scar on my shoulder, the faces of the 2 sailors who had died under my command, the 47 lives I had pulled from burning water. Play sailor. I could feel the old urge rising in me, the urge to stay silent, to let the accusations wash over me like waves against a hull, to simply stand and walk out without dignifying their ignorance with a response. Grandpa's voice echoed in my memory. The ones who matter will know, the others never will. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was enough to know my own worth without needing them to acknowledge it. Maybe peace came from accepting that some people would never see you clearly, no matter what you achieved. I was actually considering leaving. My muscles had already begun to tense in preparation for standing. I would walk out of this room, drive back to my base, and never think about the Harmon family again. I would let them have their bronze stars and purple hearts, their ceremonial swords and their petty victories. I would carry Grandpa's memory in my own heart, where it belonged, where they could never tarnish it. But then Brandon spoke again. "She's never sacrificed anything." His voice was loud enough to carry to every corner of the room, dripping with the confidence of someone who had never been contradicted. "She just plays sailor while the rest of us build actual lives. What does she even do? Float around on boats and take orders," he snorted. "Grandpa was a real military man, a hero. Elise doesn't have the first clue what that means." Something shifted in my chest. A door that had been closed for a very long time began to crack open. I thought about the 47. I thought about the 2. I thought about the 9 hours on the bridge, the shrapnel tearing through my shoulder, the choice I made to stay when every regulation told me to go. I thought about Grandpa, old and sick, using his last weeks to track down the classified details of my service, to find out what I had done and why I had done it. He knew. He had always known. And now, sitting in this room full of people who had never understood either of us, I realized that his final gift wasn't just the Medal of Honor. It was the truth. The truth about who I was, what I had done, and why his legacy belonged with me. My hand moved without conscious thought, reaching up to touch my left shoulder. The scar was hidden beneath my blouse, invisible to anyone who didn't know it was there. But I knew. I felt it every day. I would feel it for the rest of my life. I lowered my hand slowly, and I looked at the attorney. He was watching me with something I recognized, something I had seen in the eyes of sailors who knew more than they were permitted to say. He was waiting for my permission. I thought about walking away. I thought about the peace of silence, the dignity of letting them believe whatever they wanted to believe. And then I thought about Grandpa, saluting me at my graduation, tears in his eyes, whispering words I would carry forever. Now you understand. I understood. I had always understood. And maybe it was time for them to understand too. I looked at the attorney, and I nodded once slowly. "Read the rest." The attorney's demeanor shifted in a way that only I seemed to notice at first. His shoulders straightened. His voice, when he spoke, carried a different weight, something almost reverential. It was the subtle change of a civilian encountering the gravity of military service for the first time, the moment when paperwork becomes something more than words on a page. He reached into the folder before him and produced a separate envelope, distinct from the other documents. This one was cream-colored, heavier stock, hand-addressed in the shaking but deliberate script I recognized as Grandpa's handwriting from his final months. The ink was dark blue, the same color he had always used, the same color of the ocean he had loved. But it was the letterhead visible beneath the envelope that made my breath catch in my throat. The seal of the Department of the Navy, embossed in gold, unmistakable to anyone who had served. Derek saw it too, and his hand shot out. "What is that? Let me see it." The attorney pulled the envelope back, his expression hardening. "This is addressed only to Commander Harmon. I am not authorized to release it to anyone else." The word hung in the air like a depth charge waiting to explode. "Commander." Meredith's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Commander? Commander of what?" Brandon let out a nervous laugh, the sound high and brittle. "That's not a real rank, is it? Is that some kind of honorary thing, like a title they give to donors or something?" I watched the confusion spread across their faces and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. They genuinely didn't know. They had never bothered to learn the ranks of the service I had devoted my life to, had never wondered what I actually did during all those years I was away. I was simply absent to them. A gap in family photos, an empty chair at holiday tables, nothing more. Uncle Victor's face had gone pale. He was staring at the envelope in the attorney's hands, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, a memory struggling to surface. "Wait," he said slowly. "Wait. My father mentioned something once, something about Elise. I didn't understand what he meant at the time." "What are you talking about? Derek demanded. Uncle Victor didn't answer. He was looking at me now, really looking, as if seeing me for the first time. He said you were going to outrank him someday. I thought he was joking. I thought he was just being sentimental because you were the only one who joined the Navy. I held his gaze but said nothing. Let them work it out for themselves. Let the truth dawn on them the way morning breaks over the ocean, slow and then all at once. The attorney cleared his throat. Commander Harmon, do I have your permission to read the contents of Admiral Harmon's letter aloud? Every eye in the room turned to me. I could feel the weight of their attention, the confusion and the growing unease. Derek's face was mottled with anger and something else now, something that might have been the first stirring of fear. Meredith had set down her champagne glass, the celebration forgotten. Brandon's nervous smile had faded into something blank and uncertain. I nodded. You have my permission. The attorney opened the envelope with careful precision, unfolding the letter inside. He adjusted his reading glasses and began. My dearest Elise. Grandpa's voice seemed to fill the room, carried on the attorney's measured tones. I closed my eyes and let myself hear him, really hear him, the way I had heard him in his study all those years ago, polishing metals that remembered the men who didn't come home. If you are hearing this letter, then I am gone, and the vultures have gathered to pick over my remains. I do not say this with bitterness, only with the clear-eyed honesty that comes at the end of a long life. I know what my grandchildren are. I know what they value and what they do not. And I know that you are different from all of them. Derek made a sound of protest, but the attorney continued without pause. You never asked for anything, Elise. Not for my medals, not for my approval, not for any piece of the legacy I built over 90 years of living. You simply served. You put on the uniform, you went to sea, and you gave your life to something larger than yourself. That is the only inheritance that matters. That is the only legacy I was ever proud to claim. My throat tightened. I had to focus on my breathing, steady and controlled, the way I did on the bridge when situations demanded clarity above all else. I know you think I never knew what you did. I know you kept it secret because you learned from me that true service needs no audience. But I have friends who still serve, Elise. Old sailors like me, with long memories and access to information that isn't meant for civilian eyes. And what they told me about you filled me with more pride than any medal I ever earned. The room had gone utterly silent. Even Derek had stopped protesting. They were listening now, truly listening, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath their assumptions. They told me about the night in the Western Pacific, about the Allied vessel that was sinking in hostile waters, about the commander who disobeyed orders to save 47 lives. They told me about the 9 hours on the bridge, the shrapnel, the refusal to evacuate. They told me about the 2 sailors who didn't come home, and how you carry them with you still, the way I carry my own fallen brothers. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. Let them see. Let them understand that grief and strength were not opposites but companions. Elise, you understand what the others never will. Medals aren't inherited. They're earned through sacrifice. I know what you did. I know what it cost you. You are the only one who truly understands the weight of the medal we carry. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a silent vibration against my thigh. I glanced at the screen without moving, a practiced motion from years of command. A text message from my executive officer. Admiral Reynolds sends his respects for today. The timing felt deliberate, as if the universe were confirming what Grandpa had written. I was not alone. I had never been alone. I had a family of my own, a family of those who served, who understood sacrifice and duty and the true meaning of honor. The attorney paused, looking up from the letter. There is more, but Admiral Harmon included a separate document as well, a certified copy of an official Navy citation. He produced another page from the envelope. I recognized the formatting immediately, the precise military language, the letterhead of the Secretary of the Navy. My heart began to pound. With Commander Harmon's permission, I would like to read the relevant excerpt. I nodded again, not trusting my voice. The attorney cleared his throat. The Navy Cross is presented to Commander Elise Harmon, United States Navy. for extraordinary heroism in combat while serving as commanding officer of USS Valor during operations in the Western Pacific. Commander Harmon's decisive leadership, tactical brilliance, and personal courage under fire directly resulted in the rescue of 47 Allied personnel from a sinking vessel in contested waters. Despite sustaining significant wounds, Commander Harmon remained at her post for 9 hours, coordinating rescue operations while under enemy fire. Her actions reflected the highest traditions of the United States Navy and were in keeping with the finest traditions of naval service. The silence that followed was absolute. I opened my eyes and looked at my family. Derek's mouth hung open, but no words emerged. The bluster and confidence had drained from his face, leaving something pale and hollow in its place. Meredith had gone completely still, her champagne glass forgotten on the table beside her, and as I watched, I saw her fingers tremble. The glass tipped, slowly at first, then faster, tumbling from the edge of the table. It struck the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, shattering into a dozen glittering pieces. The champagne spread in a pale puddle that no one moved to clean. Brandon was staring at me as if I had transformed into a stranger. His expression held the bewildered look of someone who had spent years constructing a narrative, only to watch it collapse without warning. His lips moved, forming a single word that he couldn't seem to speak aloud. 47. Uncle Victor had sunk into his chair, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders were shaking, though whether from grief or shame I couldn't tell, perhaps both. The attorney's assistant, a young woman in a gray suit who had been sitting quietly in the corner, reached up and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She caught my gaze and nodded once, a small acknowledgement from one professional to another. The attorney returned to Grandpa's letter, his voice softer now. My granddaughter was awarded the Navy Cross. She told no one. She never would have. That is who she is. That is who I raised her to be, even when her own parents and cousins could not see her clearly. He paused, letting the words settle over the room like snow. The Medal of Honor belongs with someone who understands that it was never about the medal. It was about the 47. It was about the ones who didn't come home. Elise is the only one I trust to remember that. The attorney set down the letter and removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief, as if to give the room a moment to absorb what had just been revealed. The rain had stopped at some point during the reading, and pale afternoon light was beginning to filter through the windows, casting long shadows across the dark wood floor. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my expression carefully neutral. It was the posture I had learned to maintain during the most difficult moments of command, when the lives of hundreds depended on my ability to project calm even as chaos erupted around me. But inside, I was anything but calm. Grandpa's words had cracked something open in me, a reservoir of grief and love and validation that I had kept sealed for so long I had almost forgotten it existed. He knew, he had known everything, and he had loved me not in spite of my service, but because of it. The attorney cleared his throat. There is one final passage, and then we will proceed with the formal transfer of Admiral Harmon's Medal of Honor to Commander Harmon. He picked up the letter again, and I heard Grandpa's voice in every word. Elise, when you were 8 years old, you asked me what my medals meant. I told you they remembered the men who didn't come home. I did not tell you the rest of the truth because you were too young to understand. But you are not too young anymore. You have earned the right to know. I leaned forward slightly, my breath catching. Grandpa had never spoken to me about this, not once in all the years we had shared. The truth is that every medal I ever received felt like a wound, not because I was ungrateful, but because I survived when better men did not. The Bronze Stars, the Purple Heart, even the Medal of Honor, they were all reminders that I came home and others did not. I spent 60 years carrying that weight, and I never found a way to set it down. The attorney's voice had grown rough. He paused to take a sip of water before continuing. But when I learned what you did in the Western Pacific, when I read the classified reports and spoke to the admirals who had witnessed your courage, I understood something for the first time. The weight is not a burden. It is a sacred trust. We carry our fallen brothers and sisters with us not because we are guilty, but because we loved them. And we honor them not by hiding from the world, but by living lives worthy of their sacrifice. Tears were flowing freely down my face now. I didn't try to stop them. Let my family see. Let them understand that strength and vulnerability were not opposites, but partners in the dance of a life fully lived. You carry your 47 the same way I carry my brothers from Korea. You carry them with every decision you make, every order you give, every night you spend on the bridge watching the horizon for danger. That is what the medals remember, Elise. Not glory, not victory. Love, sacrifice, the willingness to give everything for the person beside you. The attorney set down the letter and reached into his folder one final time. He produced a wooden case, perhaps 8 inches square, made of polished mahogany with brass hinges. Even from across the room, I recognized it. I had seen it 1,000 times in Grandpa's study, sitting in a place of honor on his desk, never displayed ostentatiously but always present, always visible to those who knew where to look. The Medal of Honor. Admiral Harmon's final bequest, the attorney said, his voice formal now, respectful of the gravity of the moment. The Medal of Honor, awarded to Rear Admiral Thomas Harmon for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty during the Korean War, to be transferred solely and irrevocably to Commander Elise Harmon, United States Navy. He stood and walked toward me, the case held before him like an offering. The room seemed to hold its breath. I could feel my family's eyes on me, but I didn't look at them. I couldn't. All I could see was the case, and all I could hear was Grandpa's voice, whispering across the years. The ones who matter will know. I rose to my feet. My legs felt unsteady, but I locked my knees and straightened my spine, calling upon every ounce of discipline the Navy had instilled in me. I would not falter. Not now, not in front of them. The attorney stopped before me and extended the case. Commander Harmon, on behalf of Admiral Harmon's estate, I present to you this Medal of Honor, with the understanding and expectation that you will preserve its legacy with the same honor and integrity with which it was earned. I reached out and took the case. The wood was warm beneath my fingers, smooth with decades of careful handling. I could almost feel Grandpa's presence in the weight of it, as if some part of him still resided in this simple wooden box. I didn't open it, not yet. That moment would come later in private, when I could be alone with my grief and my gratitude. For now, I simply held it against my chest and closed my eyes. Thank you, Grandpa. I understand. I have always understood. When I opened my eyes, the room had transformed. The tension that had hung in the air since I arrived had shifted into something else, something charged with revelation and disbelief. My cousins were frozen in various postures of shock, their faces registering the slow, painful recalibration of everything they had believed about me. Derek was the first to move. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and took a step toward me. His face was a battlefield of conflicting emotions: anger, confusion, denial, and something that might have been the first stirrings of shame. "This is," he started, then stopped. He shook his head as if trying to clear it. "This has to be some kind of mistake. Classified missions, the Navy Cross, you." He laughed, but the sound was hollow, desperate. "You're telling me you did all of that and never said anything, never told anyone? That doesn't make sense. People brag about things like that. People use things like that to get ahead." I looked at him calmly. "Not everyone, Derek." "But why?" His voice cracked with genuine bewilderment. "Why would you keep it secret? You could have shut us all up years ago. You could have made us look like idiots." I considered the question. It deserved an honest answer, even if Derek wouldn't understand it. "Because it was never about you. It was never about any of you. What I did, what I continue to do, I do it because it matters. Because there are people out there who need someone willing to sacrifice for them. Whether you know about it or not, whether you approve or not, whether you respect me or not, that was never relevant to my service." Meredith had risen from her seat, picking her way carefully around the broken glass at her feet. Her face was pale beneath her makeup, and her hands were shaking. "Elise, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. If I had known what you were doing, what you had accomplished, I never would have said those things." I looked at her, really looked, seeing not the polished society woman but the insecure cousin who had always measured her worth in comparison to others. Would you, Meredith? Or would you have just found different things to say, different ways to dismiss me? She opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no answer, and we both knew why. Brandon hadn't moved from his seat. He was staring at the floor, his face blank with shock. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 47 people. You saved 47 people. I nodded. Yes. And 2 didn't make it. The words hit me like a wave, unexpected and powerful. For a moment, I was back on the bridge of the USS Valor, watching the rescue boats return with their precious cargo, counting heads, realizing that the final count was 47 instead of 49. 2 of my own crew gone, 2 families who would receive the call, 2 names that would join the endless list of those who gave everything. That's right, I said quietly. 2 didn't make it. Petty Officer Marcus Chen and Seaman Recruit Alicia Torres. They died pulling survivors from the water while I commanded from the bridge. I carry them with me every day. Brandon looked up at me, and for the first time in my memory, I saw something genuine in his eyes. Not admiration, exactly, not respect, but something approaching recognition. The beginning of understanding that military service was not about collecting memorabilia or displaying medals in home offices. It was about sacrifice. It was about loss. It was about carrying the weight of those who didn't come home. I didn't know, he said. I didn't understand. No, I agreed. You didn't. Uncle Victor finally lifted his face from his hands. His eyes were red, his cheeks wet with tears. He looked older than I had ever seen him, as if the revelation had aged him a decade in minutes. Elise, his voice broke on my name. My father never told me. He never said a word about what you had done. I knew you were in the Navy, of course, but I thought I assumed. He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. You assumed I was just following orders, I finished for him. You assumed I was nobody special, just another sailor on a boat somewhere, doing whatever sailors do. He nodded miserably. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I should have asked. I should have taken an interest. I should have been proud of you the way my father was. I looked at my uncle, the man who had enabled his children's entitlement for decades, who had allowed them to mock and dismiss me without ever speaking up in my defense. Part of me wanted to rage at him, to unleash years of accumulated hurt in a torrent of accusations. But what would be the point? He knew now. They all knew, and their knowledge was its own punishment. Grandpa was proud of me, I said softly. That was always enough. The silence that followed my words stretched thin and fragile, like ice forming over deep water. I could feel the shift in the room, the power dynamic that had governed my family for decades finally cracking under the weight of truth. They didn't know what to do with this new reality, this version of me that didn't fit into the small box they had constructed. Derek was the first to recover. Perhaps it was inevitable. He had spent 41 years believing himself to be the center of every room, the natural heir to every legacy. One revelation, no matter how profound, wouldn't change that overnight. Classified, he said, his voice regaining some of its former edge. He stood straighter, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for battle. That's convenient, isn't it? Classified means nobody can verify anything. Classified means you can make up whatever story you want and nobody can prove otherwise. The attorney looked up sharply. Mr. Harmon, I assure you that these documents are authentic. The Navy Cross citation was provided directly by the Department of the Navy and verified through official channels. Admiral Harmon went to considerable lengths to ensure the legitimacy of this bequest. But Derek wasn't listening. He was looking at me, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind, searching for any angle that would restore the narrative he preferred. Even if it's true, he pressed on, even if you did save some people on some boat somewhere, that doesn't mean you deserve Grandpa's Medal of Honor. That medal represents his sacrifice, his legacy. It should stay in the family where everyone can appreciate it, not locked away with someone who's never even home. I looked at my cousin, really looked at him, and I felt something unexpected, pity. He was so desperate to matter, so hungry for validation, that he couldn't recognize genuine sacrifice standing right in front of him. He had spent his whole life trying to inherit significance instead of earning it. "Derek," I said quietly, "do you even know what Grandpa did to earn that medal?" He blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "Of course I do. He was a war hero. He fought in Korea. Everyone knows that." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you know what he did. Specifically, the mission, the circumstances, the names of the men who died beside him." Derek's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Meredith for support, but she was staring at the floor, unwilling to meet his eyes. He looked at Brandon, who had gone very still. He looked at Uncle Victor, who was crying silently into his hands. None of them knew. I could see it in their faces. They had grown up with the Medal of Honor displayed in Grandpa's study, had bragged about it at dinner parties and used it to impress their friends, but they had never once asked him what it meant, what it cost, who had paid the price so that he could come home. "He rescued 12 men from a burning ship while under enemy fire," I said, my voice steady and clear. "The ship had taken a direct hit and was sinking fast. Everyone told him it was hopeless, that the flames were too intense, that there was no way anyone could still be alive. He went back into the fire 3 times. 3 times, Derek. He carried the last survivor out on his back, even though his own leg had been shattered by shrapnel." I paused, watching their faces. "And when it was over, when he was lying in a hospital bed in Japan waiting to learn whether he would ever walk again, all he could think about was the 4 men he couldn't save. He knew their names, their hometowns, the names of their wives and children. He wrote letters to every one of their families. He carried those 4 men with him for the rest of his life." The room had gone completely silent. Even the rain seemed to have paused outside the windows. "He told me that story once, when I was 17. It was the only time he ever spoke about it. And do you know what he said at the end? He said he would trade every medal he ever earned to bring those 4 men home. He said the ribbons and the ceremonies meant nothing compared to the weight of their names in his memory." Derek's face had gone pale. For a long moment, he had nothing to say. "You want to know why Grandpa left me his Medal of Honor? It wasn't because I earned the Navy Cross. It wasn't because I saved 47 lives. It was because I understand what he understood. That medals aren't trophies. They're not decorations to impress your friends or symbols of status to display in your home office. They're testimonies of sacrifice. They're graves you carry with you everywhere you go." I held up the wooden case, feeling its weight in my hands. "This medal isn't a prize. It's a responsibility. Grandpa knew that I would treat it the way he treated it, not as something to show off, but as something to protect, something to honor, something to remember." Meredith stepped forward, picking her way carefully around the broken glass from her champagne flute. Her face was a complicated mixture of emotions. Shame, certainly, and perhaps something approaching genuine remorse. "Elise, I want you to know that I always knew you were doing important work. I just didn't realize how important. I didn't understand the scope of what you were actually doing out there." She reached out as if to touch my arm, then thought better of it. "I'm sorry for the things I said, about you being a ghost, about you not contributing to the family. I was wrong." I studied her face, searching for sincerity. It was hard to tell with Meredith. She had spent so many years performing for social advantage that I wasn't sure she knew the difference anymore. "What exactly would have changed, Meredith? If you had known about the Navy Cross, would you suddenly have respected me? Would you have stopped making comments about my absences? Would you have defended me when Derek called me a waste of Grandpa's time?" She flinched at each question, her composure cracking like thin ice. "Because here's what I think," I continued. "I think you would have found other reasons to dismiss me. The specific accomplishments never mattered. What mattered was that I didn't fit into your world. I didn't play by your rules. I didn't compete for the prizes you valued. And that made you uncomfortable, so you told yourself stories about who I was." Meredith's eyes filled with tears. "That's not fair, Elise." "Maybe not, but it's honest. And I think we've all had enough pretending." Brandon rose slowly from his seat, moving as if uncertain of his footing. He stopped a few feet away from me, looking younger somehow, stripped of the confident posture he usually wore like armor. 47 people, he said. as if the number held some meaning he was still trying to comprehend. "You saved 47 people, and you never told anyone. You just kept serving, kept deploying, kept doing your job like it was nothing special." "It wasn't special," I said. "It was my duty. Anyone in my position would have done the same." Brandon shook his head slowly. No, they wouldn't. Going into hostile waters without backup, commanding a rescue operation for 9 hours while wounded, refusing evacuation until every survivor was aboard. That's not just doing your job, that's being a hero. I flinched at the word. I had never been comfortable with it. "I'm not a hero, Brandon. The heroes are the ones who didn't come home. Petty Officer Chen and Seaman Torres gave everything. I just gave my shoulder." I touched the scar beneath my blouse, then dropped my hand. Brandon's eyes followed the gesture with new understanding. "That's where the shrapnel hit you." "Left shoulder. The corpsmen wanted to evacuate me, but there were still people in the water." Brandon was quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "I've been collecting military memorabilia for years. Medals, uniforms, weapons. I told myself I was honoring veterans, but I think I was just playing pretend, living vicariously through other people's sacrifices because I was too afraid to make my own." I considered his confession. Keep Grandpa's Purple Heart, but learn its story. Learn the names of the men who served beside him. If you can carry their memory instead of just displaying the medal, then maybe it will mean something. "I will," he promised. "I will." Derek had been silent through this exchange, but I could see his anger building again. His face was flushed, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "This is ridiculous," he burst out. "You're all acting like she's some kind of saint just because she did her job. She's a soldier. That's what soldiers do. That doesn't make her better than the rest of us." I turned to face him, and something in me went very still. Not anger, something colder, something calmer. "You think you're better than us now?" Derek demanded, taking a step toward me. "You think you can walk in here after years of ignoring this family and suddenly claim Grandpa's legacy?" I held his gaze without flinching. I had faced enemy fire. I had commanded a ship through hostile waters while bleeding. Derek's anger was nothing compared to what I had survived. "I never thought about you at all, Derek. I was too busy trying to keep people alive." The words landed like a physical blow. Derek recoiled, his face slack with shock. For once in his life, he was completely speechless. I turned to the attorney. "Is there anything else requiring my signature?" "No, Commander Harmon. The transfer is complete." I nodded, tucking the wooden case under my arm. I looked around the room one final time. Derek, stunned into silence. Meredith, weeping quietly. Brandon, contemplative. Uncle Victor, broken and grieving. "You can have the bronze stars, the Purple Heart, the ceremonial swords. They're just metal. They only mean something if you understand the weight they carry." I walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "Medals aren't inherited. They're earned through sacrifice. Grandpa knew that. He knew I knew it too." I stepped out without looking back. The hallway outside the attorney's office was quiet, carpeted in deep burgundy that muffled my footsteps. I walked past oil paintings of stern-faced partners from decades past, past a receptionist who glanced up with curious eyes, past the heavy wooden door that separated this world of inheritance and argument from the street outside. The rain had stopped while I was inside. The clouds were beginning to break apart overhead, and shafts of pale afternoon sunlight sliced through the gray, illuminating the puddles that dotted the pavement like scattered mirrors. The air smelled clean, washed fresh by the storm. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the Medal of Honor case pressed against my chest, and simply breathed. In and out, slow and steady. The way I had learned to breathe on the bridge during the worst moments of command, when panic would have been easy and calm was the only thing keeping people alive. It was over. The confrontation I had dreaded, the revelation I had never intended to make. It was all behind me now, contained in that wood-paneled room with its broken champagne glass and shattered assumptions. I should have felt triumph, vindication. Instead, I felt hollow. Like a ship that had weathered a terrible storm and reached safe harbor, only to find that the journey had taken something vital from its hull. I was still standing there when I heard the door open behind me. "Elise, wait, please." Uncle Victor's voice was rough, stripped of the paternal authority he usually projected. I didn't turn around, but I didn't walk away either. His footsteps were slow on the wet sidewalk. When he reached my side, I could see he looked diminished somehow. The confident businessman was gone, replaced by a grieving son who had finally learned that his father had been right about things he never understood. "Your grandfather," he began, then stopped. He cleared his throat. "My father was always difficult to read. He kept so much to himself. The war, the medals, the things he saw, he never talked about any of it with me. I used to think it was because he didn't trust me. Now I wonder if he just didn't think I would understand." I said nothing. I wasn't sure what response he was looking for. "When you joined the Navy," Victor continued, "I thought you were running away, from the family, from responsibility. Derek was building his business. Meredith was raising her children, and you were just gone, always deployed, always overseas." "I was serving my country," I said quietly, "the same way Grandpa served his." "I know that now," Victor's voice cracked, "but I didn't understand it then. I thought sacrifice meant missing a vacation or working late. I didn't realize it meant missing your grandmother's funeral because you were on the other side of the world. I didn't realize it meant carrying shrapnel in your shoulder and names in your heart." He paused, struggling to compose himself. "My father told me once near the end that you were going to outrank him someday." I laughed. I thought he was being sentimental, but he wasn't, was he? He knew exactly who you were and what you had done. I finally turned to look at my uncle. His face was wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as an antagonist, but as a man who had spent 64 years living in his father's shadow, never understanding what made that shadow so long. "Grandpa saw me," I said simply. "He was the only one who ever really saw me." Victor nodded slowly. "I should have seen you too. I should have asked questions instead of making assumptions. I should have defended you when my children mocked your choices. I failed you, Elise." I considered his apology. It was genuine, but I wasn't sure what to do with it. I had spent so many years armoring myself against this family's judgment that I didn't know how to receive their belated recognition. "What do you want from me, Uncle Victor? Absolution." He shook his head. "I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry, and that I'm going to try to be different, to learn what I should have learned decades ago." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I reached out and touched his arm, just briefly. "That's all any of us can do. Try to be different. Try to carry the weight of those who taught us, even when we didn't realize we were being taught." Victor's face crumpled. He reached up and covered my hand with his own, squeezing once before letting go. "Thank you, Elise. Thank you for being who you are, even when we couldn't see it." I withdrew my hand. "Tell Derek and the others that the medals they inherited aren't just decorations. If they can learn to honor what those medals represent, maybe something good can come from today." "I will, I promise." I nodded once, then walked toward my car. It was parked at the end of the block, a simple sedan in navy blue, nothing flashy, just reliable transportation from one duty station to another. Victor didn't follow me. When I glanced back, he was still standing on the sidewalk, watching me go, his figure small and solitary. I wondered if he would keep his promise. I wondered if any of them would truly change. But in the end, it didn't matter. Their transformation was not my responsibility. I had my own weight to carry, my own names to remember, my own legacy to honor. I reached my car and opened the passenger door. Carefully, almost reverently, I placed the Medal of Honor case on the seat. The wood gleamed in the afternoon light, warm and rich with decades of careful handling. Grandpa's hands had touched this case thousands of times. Now it was mine to protect. Before getting in, I paused and looked up at the sky. The clouds had parted further, and the sun was streaming through in golden shafts. It felt like a benediction. Like Grandpa himself was watching from somewhere far away, nodding his approval the way he had nodded at that barbecue when I was 16, the way he had saluted me at graduation. I slid into the driver's seat and pulled the door closed. The interior was quiet, insulated from the street outside. I sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the Medal of Honor case beside me. Then I reached over and touched the box, my fingers tracing the edge of the wood. "I'll keep it safe, Grandpa," I whispered. "I'll remember them for both of us, the 4 you couldn't save, the 47 I brought home, the 2 who gave everything. I'll carry them all the way you taught me." Tears slid down my cheeks. I let them fall. There was no one here to see, no need for composure. This grief was private, sacred. After a long moment, I wiped my eyes and started the engine. I pulled away from the curb and into the afternoon traffic, leaving the attorney's office and my family behind. I didn't look back. There was no need. Some legacies aren't passed down. They're lived. And I had a legacy to live, one sacrifice at a time, one name remembered at a time. The road stretched out before me, leading back to the base, back to my ship, back to the only family that had ever truly claimed me. The Navy, the sea, the endless horizon where duty and honor met. Grandpa's Medal of Honor sat beside me, a sacred trust I would carry for the rest of my life. And somewhere, I knew he was proud.